Now, you've used a number of novels as your source material. How do you do that? What's the art in adaptation? How do you approach an adaptation of a novel?
I saw Volker Schlondorf spoke at an event I went to in Inverness many years ago, and he said he did like Tin Drum, which is a fantastic movie and a fantastic adaptation, and he did Swan in Love, and he's specialised in adaptation, and he's always said that the more cinematic the book is, and the more obvious that you think that the adaptation is, the harder it is, and somehow or other, actually, when you've got a story that doesn't seem very easy to adapt, or that's even unfilmable, then what you do is you take the essential elements and you discard the rest, and you make your own story with it. I mean, in Young Adam, I was very fortunate that it was a novella. It was short. It translated pretty much exactly. It's a very faithful adaptation. There are a few. It's very interior. There are a few things where I had to sort of externalize things that were interior, and that's often what you have to do with the adaptation process. Is because of the narrational devices that you're allowed in literature, that you're not, unless you have chunks of voiceover, which are I did use in my most recent film, but up until then I haven't used. You have to find ways of externalizing things that are internal. You have to translate literary devices into cinematic devices, and that's part of the challenge. But with Young Adam, it was quite easy. With Asylum, I think Asylum was a very dense book, and there were quite large areas of it that we couldn't go into. We couldn't have time to go into. With Hallam Foe, which I did 2 years ago or whatever, we almost completely changed it. I mean, there was a huge time cut in the middle of the book that was just not going to work as a movie. So
3 or 4 years. Yeah.
In order to change that, we had to change an awful lot of other things that went with it. And so it was almost kind of rip up the book from once you got the characters and do something else.
Now, in film classes, students are taught about the classical Hollywood narrative paradigm, about a very precise sense of structure that is implemented in mainstream Hollywood films and a lot of other European and indeed independent films. With that sense that on page 18, 18 minutes into the picture, you'll find the inciting event that's going to trigger Act 2. And now it's very formulaic, but I guess in part because it works as a dramatic structure. Is that something that you employ yourself? Why not? What's wrong with you?
Well, I mean, as you know, I've never read Robert McKee. I mean, although I've sort of glimpsed at it. I just haven't done.
You're a screenwriter who's never read Robert McKee's book, The Story, the book on screenwriting.
Or Sid Field or any of those other ones. I just haven't done it, and I don't. I mean, it's probably just laziness. But
you didn't read about screenwriting when you started writing screenplays. No. Why?
I don't know. But I mean, I don't. I mean, but just because I guess I just kind of did it, and then when you start doing it, you find your own method, and then you start thinking, oh, I'm not sure I want to be given someone else's, method, and then you start getting superstitious about that, and then you avoid it like the plague, and I'm probably now just about ready to read Robert McKee, and I think I'll probably find it really, really instructive, and I think, God, that's what I'm doing wrong all the time.
Oh, fascinating. Well, before we look at the final clip, Young Adam, it's clear from the comments you've made that it was a piece of real passion. 10 years you talked about it's being in the planning stage, at least in the back of your mind. Why was that? Why was it? Did it have such a pull on you to sustain you over 10 years to drive you to finally make it? And when you see a clip, as we've just done from the film, do you have a feeling like it's exactly the vision you had in mind, or now with the period of a few years hindsight, you would rework things in a very different way?
That's a long question. I mean, in terms of the process of I mean, I decided when I was a wannabe filmmaker that having a project that had a book that was a solid object that I could hand around to people, and that was not a bad way of getting what I thought would be my first feature film off the ground. And so I came across this book, which is a obscure cult Scottish classic, that was incredibly evocative and very cinematic, and I love the whole sort of boat thing. I come from that sort of background, and I just thought this is worth hanging on to, and so once I'd sort of got the option for it and all that, I hung on to it. I tried to get people to be interested in financing it, and no one quite naturally was interested in a very dark story that it's set in a sort of bleak industrial world. There was a period that was going to be expensive. From a director who had never done anything, and so it was a hard sell, and at various times people tried to get it off me, and I sort of hang on to it, and did other shorts and got sort of survived during that 10 years, but and was always looking for a home for it, and eventually I did find a home for it, and that was what allowed it to happen. In terms of whether I would make it differently, no. I mean, there were certain things in the script which never made. It's a very interesting process when you make a film. You have a thing called the completion bond company who come on, and they're sort of like the policemen of the film. And for first-time directors, that's a terrifying thing, because they come and tell you that, well, that schedule is not realistic. You can't do that on that day, and they ask you difficult questions, and they make you sign letters saying that if you go over budget, you'll be sent home or something. And they're there to make sure that no surprises happen, and to make sure the financiers are happy with the results they get, and that everything's going okay. They're not there to tell you how to make the film. They're just telling you, to tell you not to do this or that. But they made me. They realised the schedule that we had. We had a 38-day shoot, and the schedule we had, it was impossible to do the script that we had, and so they made me cut basically a third of the script about 2 weeks before we were due to shoot. So I ended up shooting a 70-page script as opposed to 100, and they were right. There were only 2 scenes on the cutting room floor, and we just did it in time. So they were right, but it was incredibly uncomfortable to cut that much of the film. So there are all sorts of scenes that went out in that process. That I looked at the script again relatively recently, and I thought, oh, those are good scenes. And it would have been nice to have had to revisit it with those scenarios. Would be well, that's the only thing I would do. But also, I think I have a different sense of what cinema is now than I did then. And there's a kind of
In what respect?
Well, just in terms of coverage, in terms of letting things run, in terms of not going into the editing so much, and I might well have done it in a different way.
Right. Let's move on to the last clip, which is for the film Hallam Foe, starring Jamie Bell, who of course achieved a lot of attention in the film Billy Elliot. This film came out in 2001. Like Young Adam, it won a number of prestigious awards. Hallam Foe is another adaptation, I think, by a novel by a friend of yours, Peter Jinks, whom you shared flat with in Edinburgh at once upon a time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, knowing that, as I said with the Young Adam thing about getting hold of a book, gives you kind of a certain level of control. If you know the author, it's easier to get hold of the book. You know what I mean? And so, and we knew about the book even before it was written. So it was just not quite a shoo-in, because I think he made us kind of put us through the hoops a bit. But basically that was it came to us quite quickly.
It's been a huge treat to have you on the Director's Cut, and I'm so glad we were finally able to bring you to Aberdeen.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your very kind words and all that. And I hope it was. I can't help feeling that I wasn't really very articulate. So I'm sorry. I hope it was something useful. But thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.